Our next question was submitted online from Lance in Moab, and his question is, recently both parties put forward spending bills that included ideological riders being attached that harmed our communities, families, and environments. These riders have no place in must-pass spending legislation. What can be done to change this process?
Okay, Lance. The first thing that needs to change there is that we've got to stop governing by cliff. When we govern by cliff, that's when we set an arbitrary deadline by which we say, okay, spending bill X has to be passed by date Y. And then when we fail to undertake the normal funding process for the government, that is to say, when we don't follow the Budget Act of 1974, which contemplates that after passing a budget, which we did last year for the first time in 6 years, that Congress is supposed to pass 12 separate spending bills, at least 12 separate bills, each dealing with a different aspect of government. One, for example, to fund the Pentagon and military operations. Another one to fund transportation projects. Another one to fund veterans programs, and so on and so forth until all the federal government is funded. Unfortunately, we didn't do that last year. After passing a budget, we had members of the Senate who blocked consideration of those itemized appropriations bills, and we got to the end of the fiscal year with no funding mechanism in place. And so as a result, what you had were 4 members of Congress, 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans, went behind closed doors, and they worked out a bill that was 2,242 pages long. Now, yeah, of course, there were some appropriations riders in there, and I understand your concern with those, but I don't believe those are the problem. I think those are perhaps a symptom of the problem, and I think you and I are perhaps perceiving some of the same problem. The underlying problem is that Congress isn't doing its job. Congress isn't keeping the government funded as it was intended to do. In other words, we're supposed to be funding it through at least 12 different spending bills so that you're never putting funding for the entire government on the table at one time. As long as we have a constitutional republic, there will always be policy riders attached to spending bills. But the problem that we had with the legislation you described is that we received this 2,242 page spending bill that, depending on how you measured it, spent either a little over $1 trillion or a little under $2 trillion. It was presented to us as a simple take it or leave it proposition, a binary choice, a yes or no question, 48 hours before we were called upon to vote on it. Now, I don't know about you, but I find it a little bit difficult to read 2,242 pages within 48 hours. And keep in mind, this doesn't read like a fast-paced fictional work of fiction or a novel. This is incredibly detailed legislative text. Nonetheless, I and members of my team split it up, and we read it aggressively over the next 48 hours after we got it. Unfortunately, I didn't see significant improvements to the way our government operates, and I didn't feel comfortable voting for it because it was negotiated in secret without the input of all but 4 members of Congress. In other words, there are 100 senators, 98 of them were excluded. There are 435 representatives, all but 2 of them, so 433 of them were excluded. That means upwards of 300 million Americans were effectively excluded from the process, not just the representatives, but the people they represent, because of the fact that this was negotiated in secret. Here's what I'm getting at. The biggest single problem that we've got with our spending process is that we wait to the last minute and then we don't allow input. Even if they're going to spend all in one bill, it's not the ideal way of doing it, but even if they did it that way, if they at least left several weeks for Congress to debate it and discuss it, and for individual members to offer up amendments, and to have those debated and discussed in the full view of the American people with all the transparency that is warranted under those circumstances, then at least the American people would have a voice in the process. That I see as the biggest problem, and that's what we're trying to change. That's the whole reason. It's a very significant part of the reason why I've started this Article 1 project that we'll be launching formally this week, this internal think tank within Congress. It's designed to not to achieve any particular substantive policy outcome, but to restore the procedural protections in the Constitution, restore the functionality contemplated in our founding document that guarantees that the American people will have input into the process by which their government operates.